with infamous prisoners like Babyface Nelson and John Wayne Gacy, to the notorious crime group the Black P. Stones. This gothic-styled prison just outside of Chicago has witnessed many atrocities over its years in operation, making it a paranormal hotspot for tortured souls who eternally crave redemption. Hey there dissectors, and welcome to another haunted episode. Today we delve into the exceptionally murky history of the Old Joliet Prison, a place that has seen death far too many times, and officials tried to shut down due to its unsafe and unsanitary conditions. What are the stories behind this imposing prison and the spirits who were left behind? The prison was designed by W.W. Boyington, a man behind the Chicago water tower architecture, opening its doors for the first time on May 22nd, 1858. It was originally named Illinois State Penitentiary, but after a short time was rebranded Joliet. The original plan for the prison was to relieve the pressure on nearby Alton State Penitentiary, with the prisoners being used for labourers to build the new prison. Once completed, the process of transferring the inmates began, with the last prisoner arriving in 1860 from Alton. In its early days of operation, the prison was revered as a model prison, but before long, the population of prisoners was overwhelming. By 1878, there were over 2,000 inmates locked up inside, and living conditions were unsanitary at best. On May 21st, 1924, Nathan Leopold Jr. and his friend Richard Loeb decided to commit what they thought would be the perfect crime, but instead ended up at the Old Joliet Prison. They kidnapped a young 14-year-old boy called Bobby Franks and murdered him by a chisel to the head and gagging him until he died. They'd spent several months planning this horrific act, everything from the abduction to how they would dispose of the body. Now you may wonder why they decided to commit this crime, and the answer is very simple. According to police and relatives of these two wealthy young men, they had delusions of grandeur, believing that they were more intelligent and more superior than other people. They truly believed they could break the law, behave however they wished, and get away with it. To make matters worse, they decided to try and collect ransom from the poor boy's family, even though he was already dead by this time. But with the media all over the story, the ransom plan was tossed aside as the police were hot on their tracks. Eventually, these two nasty individuals were arrested and put on trial, both originally sentenced to death, but after some negotiations were given life sentences instead at the Old Joliet Prison. They were eventually separated while in prison, with Loeb being murdered by another inmate. Leopold, on the other hand, tried desperately to turn his life around while inside until finally being released in 1958. Many times over the years there were talks about shutting the Old Joliet Prison down, replacing it with another modern facility, and so Stateville Correctional Centre was built and opened its doors in 1925. But for some reason, instead of shutting down the prison, the two facilities operated side by side for decades to come. Now, Joliet had been given yet another chance to improve itself, you might say, but instead it went on to house even more notorious criminals who weren't easy to control inside. In the winter of 1931, the gangster and bank robber Babyface Nelson was sent to Joliet Prison for a short while. Born Lester Joseph Gillis, he was given the nickname of Babyface Nelson due to his apparent youthful looks and what some would consider handsome features. As you can imagine, this tough guy was not one to be called by his nickname to his face. He'd have likely ended your life for it. Babyface and the rest of his gang, known as the Tape Bandits, were known for robbing homes for money, jewellery, and anything expensive they could lay their hands on. They got the nickname from tying up their victims with tape. His time in Joliet was short-lived though, as during a prison transfer he managed to escape. Not knowing any other way of life, he was soon back to mixing with criminals like John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd, and was finally killed in 1934 during a shootout with the FBI. By the 1960s, the prison began operating a large reception and classification system, otherwise referred to as R&C. What this meant was that prisoners would come to Joliet before being assigned their final prison. While this system was in operation, as many as 20,000 prisoners were processed each year. In 1975, an organised crime group from Chicago known as the Black P. Stones took over a cell block in the prison, holding many correctional officers hostage. Why? Because they discovered that the authorities were wanting to split the group up as they'd gained too much power while inside. And needless to say, this didn't go down well with the Black P. Stones. After many failed attempts to reach a negotiation by the prison warden Fred L. Finkbeiner, he sent a former group member to try and talk to them, a guy called Herbert Cadillac Catlett. This didn't go as planned, as needless to say, they weren't happy to see their old member and butchered him in an act of defiance and revenge. When the warden finally came out to speak with the rioters, he was made to stand in a pool of Catlett's blood. While still in operation as a prison, Joliet also began a stint in show business, as it became the setting for many films and TV shows. The most famous of these movies was the 1980 hit film The Blues Brothers. Even when the prison finally shut down in 2002, it was used as a location for the TV show Prison Break, until finally being repurposed in 2018 as a museum, offering tours to its many visitors each year. While it had remained empty for numerous years though, it was vandalised, something terrible, with graffiti and fires being set by youths. But then the rumours of hauntings stirred up. Now, ghost stories had been going on for many years, even before the prison closed its doors. In 1932, prisoners and townsfolk were terrorised by the sound of singing coming from the convict cemetery close by, becoming a media sensation. For a month that summer, a spirit could be heard singing what was described as church hymns in a foreign language. The explanation given at the time was that a prisoner in charge of the sump pumps in the nearby quarry was responsible for the singing as he walked to and from the area each night. They reasoned that his voice was simply carrying on the evening air, making it sound like a ghostly singer. But this story does seem to have many holes in it and was picked up on pretty much immediately. You see, no prisoners were permitted to go to the quarry and back without supervision, and during this time, ghost hunters were patrolling the area for anything paranormal, and not once did they run into a prisoner going about his chores. It seems possible that the story was created as a way to explain away the haunting tale, and even to this day, the legend of the singing spirit continues. Whereas our first spirit seems quite harmless, just wanting to enjoy a good tune or two, other ghosts are not quite as charming and make their presence known in more alarming ways. Throughout the prison, disembodied voices can be heard, while in some cells, those whispers turn into screams and sounds of crying, which must be alarming to hear. But creepier still, in my opinion, is the sound of eerie whistling coming from cells too. There has been a lot of heartbreak and fear experienced inside these walls. Hundreds were killed by an execution, either from lethal injection or electrocution. Then there are the prisoners who met their end at the hands of other inmates or died from old age and sickness. You can just imagine the build-up of negative energy vibrating through the prison. Visitors describe sudden changes in the atmosphere as intense emotions overwhelm them. These feelings range from sadness, oppression, negativity, and often a deep sense of being watched from the shadows. It's not surprising though when you consider the pent-up anger and frustration the many prisoners locked up inside Old Joliet would have felt, bleeding into the foundations of the place. The strange thing to note here, which also adds to the sense that the hauntings at Joliet are genuine, is that these feelings disappear as soon as visitors leave the prison. Many paranormal investigators and other guests to the prison have taken pictures and seen strange mists and shadow figures captured in the developed photographs. But even though the spirits seem quite willing to be seen, the energy they are giving off has caused many issues to electronic devices. Not only does the equipment glitch, but battery power is drained away to nothing. Worth noting is that this mainly seems to occur in the main yard of the prison. So if this is something you want to avoid, it may be best to stay away from this area. So my thoughts on this old prison? I think the story about Leopold and Loeb was terrible. To have that level of arrogance and self-importance that you feel you can get away with anything, even murder, is horrifying and the sign of true narcissists. I'm glad they were proven wrong and paid for their crimes. Hopefully their victim Bobby Franks found the peace he rightfully deserved. As for the paranormal story that intrigued me the most, it has to be the singing spirit heard near the cemetery. It would be interesting to see if this could be explored further by a team of investigators and hopefully bring the nearly 100-year mystery to a close. So dissectors, what story from the Old Joliet prison spooked you out the most? Was it one of the many prisoners who resided here and the antics they got up to in life? Or maybe it was the chilling hauntings of the spirits of those who couldn't find peace in death? Let me know in the comments below. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, perhaps you would consider showing the channel some love with either a like, comment, or hitting subscribe so that you don't miss out on more haunted locations. Until next time, my friends, stay safe out there.